Metro on 1019 WDET FM. I'm Tia Graham. And boys, they are falling behind. A simple trip to any college campus in the U.S. today will show there are more women present than men. And that's because many men aren't going to college at the same rate. And as of last year, there are 2.4 million more women than men in undergrad on U.S. campuses. Plus, more women have college degrees today than men of the same age. That is important because the more education a person gets, the lower their chances are of living in poverty. So if getting a college degree is still the recommended path to success, why aren't men doing it? Experts say we can find some answers much earlier in a young boy's life. Today, we are going to discuss why boys are struggling with two people who are working to help Black boys overcome this right here in the city of Detroit. And we are taking this approach through the Black lens because while all boys are struggling today, Black boys are falling behind the most. And now we do want to hear from you as well in this conversation. What have you heard as to why men aren't going to college at the same rate as women? What do you think could help? Give us a call, 313-577-1019. That's 313-577-1019. Joining me now is Curtis Lewis. He is also the founder of the Black Male Educators Alliance, which works to recruit more Black men to be teachers. Curtis, welcome to the Metro.
Good morning. Well, it's good after. Well, is it? It's good. Good morning. Good morning. Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning.
Good morning.
Glad to be here. Thank you for having me.
Of course. And usually I forget to ask folks, but what part of the city? You from the city?
So, no, I'm originally from Chicago.
Oh, Midwest.
I'm from the Midwest.
Footwork.
But, Detroit, Chicago, we're brothers and sisters.
Exactly.
We're cousins. We're family. But I've been here for over 20 years. So this is home. My second home. Love Detroit. Love Chicago. But I'm a Detroiter.
Yeah.
Been doing work here for over 20 years. So this is home.
I love the connection because I have tons of family in Chicago as well, rooted in Chicago. So it's sister cities for
Absolutely.
sure. But your org works with young boys. When you ask young Black boys especially what they want to do in their careers, what do they say? What are you hearing?
Well, typically this is the conversation that we have with boys, and this has been going on for years, right? Even when I was in school back 30, 40 years ago, boys want to be who they see, right? And who do we see? And who do we idolize, right? The athletes, the musicians, those folks who are in entertainment. So what the boys want to do is what they see. And so many of them often say, I want to be a basketball, I want to be a football player, I want to be, I want to be a rapper, I want to be a musician, which are all great things, right? But I think it just speaks to the idea of we have to expose our young men to other career options.
Mm-hmm. And do they expect to go and complete college in order to achieve these particular goals?
I mean, it's all part of the narrative, right? So it depends on what family is talking about, what schools are talking about, what experience they are having at school, and what people are encouraging them to do, right? So as early as 5, 6, 7 years old, young boys are oftentimes geared towards, man, he's fast. He's going to be an athlete, right? Oh, my God, he can dance. He's going to do this. And so I think it really sort of boils down to what experiences and what people who are responsible for sort of guiding their life are encouraging them to go into.
That conversation, which we're going to get into a little bit later, of course, the conversations that we have with young boys. But young men struggle well before college, as we were just talking about. Early as 5 or 6 years old, you're starting to see them being presented with different options that may be due to physical attributes or other things like that. But boys do start to fall behind as early as preschool. And in Michigan, young girls outpace English scores. Curtis, you formerly worked in elementary education. What are some early signs that boys are struggling to focus in class?
Yeah, very good question. Research has been talking about this for years, that boys learn different than girls.
It's as simple as that.
It's as simple as that, right? And so what we do oftentimes in school, we have one way of engaging all children. And what typically tends to happen, the young boys, the way we're engaging in teaching and learning is geared more towards girls than boys. And so what happens is boys begin to act out. Boys who are a little bit more, need to be more hands-on, engaged, moving around. When they do that, they're oftentimes ostracized, right? There's sometimes, they're suspended for being too active. They're oftentimes overrepresented in special education because they can't sit still, they can't move. And so what begins to happen is they begin to withdraw from schools. Right. And so you begin to have, you see most kids like learning. Well, all kids like learning. Right. That's like natural. They're curious from the time they come out of the womb. They're curious people. Right. And so what happens in schools is by the time they get to kindergarten, first grade, second grade, the way school is structured begins to make them pull away from it and disengage. And so that's when you get numbers starting as early as third grade and fourth grade where boys begin to fall behind. And that continues on through schooling, through the middle school and high school years. It only widens, right? Because what we have not figured out, although research and folks have been talking about this, is that we have to engage our young boys differently than we engage our young girls. And so once we begin to do that work, is when we'll begin to see a shift, right? And I can talk all day about what we can start doing, but that literally, as simple as I can put it, is where the problem begins.
And how do we square the idea that schools aren't for boys with the understanding that many institutions were historically built by and for men? And when I think about that, I think, well, maybe then at that time it was an idea or it was known that you were going to be sit in this structured place and you had to act within these four bounds, these walls. And if not, then you were ostracized. So let's just talk a little bit about the historically built educational system we have here. I mean, the one that women were locked out of for so many years. Yeah. How did we get to a point now where it's no longer working for boys?
Yeah, well, we could talk very briefly about the history of education. One, it was really built to just create and continue folks who are going into sort of those skilled trades, teaching them about what citizenship means, right? And so we know women was locked out of that for years, right? However, I say this all the time, the one institution that has not changed, that should have changed a long time ago, is schools, right? And so we're still using the same model of sit and get. In a lot of schools, there are some schools that are thinking differently and thinking outside the box and doing more innovative things for teaching and learning. However, the majority of our schools are still doing the same thing they were doing 100 years ago, right? And so what's beginning to happen is what we understand is what is needed out here is different than what's needed 100 years ago. Right. And so if we still have the same structures in place for what was needed 100 years ago, that's different than now, you're going to begin to see it's not working for a lot of women either for a lot of different reasons. Right. Mm-hmm. But for some reason, the boys, the women are continuing to outpace. And that's partly because of what I said around how young men engage in learning that we are forgetting to include. And it boils down to how are we supporting teachers and what that looks like. We also know that our teaching force is 87% white women, around 87% white women, right? And so we know there's a need for more men to be in our schools that can help sort of understand how do we engage young men, how do we help them when they're getting frustrated, how do we engage with them? Like, being frustrated doesn't mean that they're angry, right? And so how do we begin to unpack those different behaviors that may be unfamiliar to some, right, or culturally different than some, and prevent us from putting these young boys into these boxes, whether it's special education or a discipline problem, and then we began to see their lack of interest in school. And then we also got to be very clear around your athletic ability is just as great as your intellect, right? And so sometimes in schools and in the communities, we focus on what it means to be an athlete versus what it means to be a smart person, right? I remember growing up back in Chicago, it wasn't cool to be smart. To be called a nerd, right? What?
Yeah, a nerd.
No, a nerd?
No.
What?
No.
You're not a nerd. You don't want to be a nerd, right? And so some of us, we shied away from looking and seeming smart or engaging in ways that make us look smart because we didn't want to be teased or talked about. And so there are some culture and community things that we also have to address along with the structures that exist in schools as well.
Curtis, I mean, we, like you said, we could talk about my bad.
That
part all.
Yeah, for sure.
But how do you encourage intellect when pop culture suggests that sports is the best way or becoming a rapper is the best way, especially within the city of Detroit? I mean, right now I think about the rappers that we have representing the city of Detroit, and I mean, I'm not knocking them, but we could definitely do a little bit better. So can we just talk a little bit about how pop culture plays a huge part in the way that young Black boys are viewing themselves?
That's a very, very good question. And I tell people all the time, man, I can't even imagine growing up as a young boy in this world with the social media. Like, it was already rough. Heading on like a whole nother world to this, another layer, it's tough. I think we have to begin to, I think this starts at home. And we have to begin to highlight the importance of learning how to read just as much as you being able to catch this ball, right? Both are important. Like, that's great, right? But how do we highlight and emphasize the importance of both? And I think sometimes we overemphasize, like I said earlier, one over the other. So I think, one, we got to start there, right? We have got to understand that whether you're an athlete or not, there's still a level of intelligence and things that you have to do to be able to make decisions around how to even spend your money. Right, that's a whole nother conversation, right? So education in itself is not just pen and pencil and going to school. Education is around like how to engage in sort of like the economics of things, right? So if you're a rapper, an athlete, or making lots of money, how do you handle that? How do you invest? Whether you are just an intellectual, a student who finding other ways to make money and make a living in this world, how do you help them understand those things? And so I think we have to start at home, and also in our schools, we have to also overemphasize. I always talk about this. I was a former principal. We have so many students. We have a game going on. It is crazy packed, right? Mm-hmm. But let it be an awards assembly, right? And so like we have got to understand the significance of the intellectual capabilities of our students just as well as the athletic abilities.
You're listening to The Metro on 101.9 WDET. I'm Tia Graham, and I'm talking to educator Curtis Lewis. He is also the founder of the Black Male Educators Alliance. We're discussing how and why boys have been falling behind in education, and the phone lines are open, and we do want to hear from you in this discussion. What have you heard as to why men aren't going to college at the same rate as women? What do you think could help? The number is 313-577-1019. It's 313-577-1019. Now, Curtis, we know that Black boys are disproportionately suspended from school and are less likely than their white peers to be enrolled in gifted programs, as you've been talking about. So can you talk about how the way a Black boy's behavior is perceived presents distinct challenges for them? I mean, we often talk about how once a Black boy gets to a certain age, he's no longer seen as a cute Black
Correct.
boy. He's now considered a threat. So let's talk about that.
That's a very, very good question. And I'm going to try to keep this brief because this is something that gets me going. So I think, one, we have got to allow our young men to be boys. And you was alluding to that. Like, oftentimes young Black boys are taught you got to grow up. You got to be a man. Be like at 7, be a man. No, let him be a boy for a minute, right? Let him be a boy for a minute. And so I think we sort of with this, and we can have a conversation around masculinity and what that looks like, right? So we hyper masculinize. I just made that word up. I got a PhD, so I can make that word up. But we put a lot of pressure on our young boys to act like grown men in first grade, where other boys of other cultures that I've seen firsthand get to just be boys. Mm-hmm. I teach at a university, and I also see like college boys just being boys, right? And so one, we have to start allowing young Black boys to be boys. That's one, and that starts at home too, because that comes. We do that in our own communities as well, that we're expecting Tom or, Chris or JoJo to be, this grown man, particularly. And I get, the rationale for this in the past when there were the lack of fathers in the home. And so like, you're the man in the house. No, you're not.
Nope.
No, you're a boy. You're 8, you're 12. You're not the man in the house, right? And so a lot of those things we have to shift. Then in our schools, we have to also understand and do our research and study around sort of the cultural differences in which how people engage, right? And so we have one size fit all model, right? And we know that oftentimes our schools' value are sort of based on white culture, right? And so we oftentimes imply those behaviors or how we think boys should act on what we see other boys do. And so when they're a little different, then we begin to respond to them different. And then we're suspending them. Or no, he's super hyperactive or he's defiant. No, he probably don't want to listen to you because he don't trust you. Right. So relationships are important. Building that trust is important. And so we have to educate those folks who are educating our children on how and what the differences are. And it's not just about, I need you to be black to be able to do this, right? Because we know 87% of the teachers, like I just said, are white. We have to teach everybody who comes into that space until we close this gap of who's in the front of these students. Teach them what it means to engage, what behaviors mean, what's an aggressive behavior and what's not. And what you may seem as aggressive because you're coming in from your lens and your bias that you deal with every day. So you see a black boy, rise up a little bit, it's reminding you of what you see on TV. And that's not what that is. So we have to really begin to unpack those biases that also people bring into the classroom around what they think the perceived notion of what people should behave or how they should behave. We have to begin to unpack that at home and at school. Yeah.
My nephew turns 10 today. And and he's in that tender age where he's starting to get to that point where it's just like, well, is he going to be perceived as the young, cute black boy now, or is he going to start to perceive as a little bit differently? And he happens to be one of those boys who is a boy. He's very much a boy. And we often get in our family, why is he so childish? Or why does he act that way at 10? He's 10. He shouldn't be doing anything other than being a little black boy. So can we just continue that just a little bit here? Not too long, though, but just continue that conversation about this growing up too fast. I mean, we talk about growing up too fast for all kids, but especially for black boys. We don't touch on that much. No. So let's just stick there for a little bit.
Yeah. And I'll say this, too. We also, as parents, have to unpack all the trauma that we've dealt with that pushes us to engage with our children the way we were engaged with. Engage with. And so it's important for us, like as a father of 3 boys, I was very aware, and I felt like I got better as I had more kids, right? So this last one, he's getting the best version of me versus the oldest, right? But I had to unpack what I thought it meant for a 12-year-old to act or a 10-year-old to act, because I grew up in the 80s. And I was told this is the way you move, this is the way you act, you got to be tough. And there's a level to that, right? That's mental toughness, all those things that come with that. But also it's just the way you're supposed to behave and act. So we asking, 4-year-olds, like, you got a little girlfriend, like, relax, he 4. He don't know. He just let him chill out. Let him learn himself for a minute before we start saying, oh, that's his little girl. So all these things, society plays a role. Our families plays a role in how we encourage or facilitate the way they see the world. And all they do is imitate what they see, right? So if they're seeing their cousins and uncles and daddies or whatever, or community members acting a certain way, this is what I'm supposed to do. So we are all responsible for ensuring that, one, we allow our boys to be boys, right? And there's levels to it, right? You grow up, you move, but also understanding that our boys need to be loved and cared for. They could be sensitive people. That doesn't mean that they're not a man, quote unquote, because they're sensitive. Or like don't even get me talking about the suicide rates of black men. That is a problem, but we don't talk about, particularly because we don't focus on the emotional, social emotional health of black boys. Right? They got to hold it in because it's not okay to talk about it. Right. And so that is something that I don't think is enough attention in the community, that the number of black boys that are committing suicide is on the rise significantly.
It's alarming.
Yes.
And I've been impacted by it as well. It's alarming. And I do not think, like you said, there's enough attention that's being brought to it. But we are going to go to the phone lines because we do have a caller. We have Adela from Detroit. What's on your mind? Why do you think boys aren't going to college at the same rate?
Yes, thank you for taking my call. I really appreciate you guys. This is Adelia calling in from downtown Detroit. And I appreciate Dr. Lewis? I appreciate him so much for coming on here. There are a couple of discussions about this matter centered around black boys and men and their traumas inflicted upon them through centuries and years and even as recent as days and months, centered around white domination and supremacy. And so that's the root that has to be kind of rooted out and try to captured and healed of our young men and our grown young men and our grown older men of color in America. It is a tall order, but I think we're going to continue to do it. There's a brother named Jason Wilson who has a dojo where he's teaching young men in Detroit how to get through their trauma and their frustrations of not having a father in their home. I mean, it goes into layers of how we can get them to go from just being sports and entertainers to scientists and engineers. So I think we are on the right path. I appreciate you all for even addressing this issue directly. Thanks again, and keep up the great continued work, and hashtag reparations now.
Adelia from Detroit, thank you so much for giving us a call this morning on the Metro. And Curtis, I do want to talk to you about role models in young men's lives. Less than 2% of public school teachers were Black men in 2020. Your organization wants to increase that number. Why is it important to have more Black men as teachers? And I didn't know that alarming 87% rate that you brought up to us today. So talk a little bit about bringing more Black men to the classrooms.
Yes. I tell this story all the time. This is sort of a cat and gat, sort of created this energy around what's important for me as I moved forward in my career as a teacher. And at the time I was teaching in Lansing, and the superintendent at the time had a young boy who was in the 5th grade who was having issues, right? Just, not sitting still, sort of mouthing off at the teachers, being disrespectful, quote unquote, disrespectful to the teachers. And she felt he needed a Black male teacher. And I was on one side of town, and when I tell you it's like 15, 16 other elementary schools at the time, there was only one Black male teacher. That was me in the entire district. So she had to take this young man across he had to drive past plenty of schools, elementary schools, to come to my school because I was the only Black male teacher in that district. That was a problem for me, right? And so for me, it began to rate, and I didn't even realize what was happening because I was like, maybe this is what it is, right? I went to Michigan State, only Black male in most of my classes. Became
green.
A teacher, go white, go white, and I didn't realize until that incident happened, like, wait, this is a problem. And so I think it's important. One, diversity of teachers and staff is important for all students, right? There's research that talks about the impact that it has on Black boys, on the suspension rates, the interest in going to college, on Black girls, on all students, right? I've been at Michigan State as a professor as well. And oftentimes, and these are students who are juniors and seniors in college, I'm the first Black male teacher they've had in their entire educational career, right? So that's the problem. So part of the work that we do at BMEA is we focus on this recruitment strategy, right? So it's important for us to begin to help younger boys understand what's possible. As I mentioned earlier, show them other areas of interest. So we started a youth leadership development program that's focused on increasing the number of Black boys who are going into teaching. That's high school boys who are tutoring and elementary school boys. They do that year round, right? And so we also expose them to what it means to be a teacher. So they visit universities, they talk to professors, they do all these things for a whole entire year over the course of the 3 years with the hope that they become teachers. And so we got to start there.
We're going to take a quick break, then continue speaking with educator Curtis Lewis. You all stay right there. Coming up, college enrollment. What more can be done to give young boys the support they need to enroll into and graduate from college? That's coming up next on the Metro, and we do want to continue to hear from the listeners. Why do you think boys are struggling today, and what do you think could help? Give us a call, 313-577-1019. That's 313-577-1019. We'll be right back. I'm Tia Graham. We are discussing why boys are falling behind in school. And joining us now is educator Curtis Lewis. He is the founder of Black Male Educators Alliance. And we are bringing into the conversation Danielle North. She is the founder of the Detroit chapter of the College Readiness and Success Program, The Bottom Line. Thank you both for joining us on the Metro. And Danielle, we're going to start with you. Boys are for the most part, still expected to be the providers of their families. Curtis and I talked just a little bit about that earlier, about the rapid speed young boys have to grow up in some of these situations. Their financial status is often tied to their value. How does that sort of pressure impact a young boy?
Yeah, it is damaging and it is isolating. So, with the work that we've been doing and the work that I've been doing across organizations that I've started with the Black Male Achievement Initiative, in which we partner with BMEA on that work. And thank you, Curtis, for everything you do. And thank you so much for having me back. We've been talking to Black males, teens and adults, and I'm also the mother of 3 Black boys at various ages, right? So I have a controlled experiment going on in my household in addition to the work that I do. And so when you talk to men, they said, we are so thankful for this safe space because we do not have safe spaces where we can talk about our vulnerabilities. And it is because of that pressure that is put on them to be a provider. And the reality is that starts very early. And unfortunately, in many single family homes in which I do not want to paint a blanket picture, but that starts early because you have people calling little boys kings. And while that is intended to be positive, a young child trying to process this idea of being a king in a child's body is then putting that pressure of what does that mean? That's a heavy weight to wear that crown. And they're not ready and they're not shaped with the royalty that they need in order to walk in that. And so when you begin to process opportunities for them, boys don't get enough space to experiment, to guess. So when they say, I'm not sure, I'm undecided, it's taken as a negative as opposed to a girl might be exploring and might actually have that freedom and that flexibility to figure it out. And so then you're also left with just saying something. And I'm going to take us into a different direction. And if you're not ready to go there, that's fine. I'll pause with this point, but to just say a big thing you're hearing them say now when you talk to them, because they don't feel safe. They don't feel like they can say, well, I'm going to go into the trades instead. College is not for me, so I'm going to go into the trades. And that is real and it's possible. But we also don't have the stats that are showing that the students are actually going into that path. So if we can get them into it and they actually go into it, yes, they can be successful. Yes, they can have valuable earnings, right? And so I just want to say that the pressure is on them very early. They do not get the opportunity to be vulnerable and be safe in spaces. And offering those spaces where they can just talk and be honest is so key because boys are not protected. In raising sons, I know because I have a Black male husband. And I know I'm a woman and I'm being delicate, but also I think societally we do not protect them enough. I'm like, if it were a girl, what would you do? And then the answer is something different. Why is it different for the boys? Why aren't we protecting them?
And Danielle, honestly, this whole conversation, as soon as you brought up King, I just thought to myself, I can run with this and talk to you about this for so long. We are so down to the wire with the conversation now, though, already. But I'm going to bring you back to talk about that just further in the future, because that is a whole thing that we can jump into. Same thing, Curtis, shaking your head like, yeah. We're going to jump back to the phones really quickly. We have Kathy in Detroit. What is on your mind, Kathy?
Hi, thanks for letting me speak briefly. I'm a retired educator, and I know, first of all, that the European system of education definitely is not for us. So we end up in the beginning of our educations having to adjust. All children, particularly children of colored children, learn by using all of their senses. Many times in a Eurocentric environment, it's more lecture. Secondly, there are institutions around the country. One that I worked at after I left, I took a short sabbatical from higher education to work for one of the top private institutions in the world. And this brother who's talking to you should meet Mr. Paul Adams, who founded Providence St. Mel High School, on the west side of Chicago.
Did you hear that,
and
Kathy?
Paul,
she went there. Or Kathy, Curtis went there.
Well, he may have been one of my students when I was there. I was a counselor. But you need to talk with Paul, because, you know, since 1978, every student has gone to a 4-year baccalaureate institution. The brother sacrificed. He knows education. And you have to talk to brothers who have led Black children to succeed academically. Also, in Chicago. And another thing, we can always steal from goodness, and they'll help us, is the Golden Apple Foundation, which selects, and I was on the board. It selects,
we're working with them. We're trying to
work. 30 years. It selects, for the last 30 years, students who score 25, 28 on the ACT to be educators. Once you get those high achievers in the classroom, it's a whole different story.
Kathy, thank you so much we're down to the wire here, Kathy. I want to say thank you so much. And this is clearly a topic that you all really, really are passionate about. So, Kathy, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. Now, we're down to like a minute and a half here left. So, Curtis and Danielle, how do you motivate a young man who may not even be considering college for themselves? Danielle, we're going to start with you.
So one of the things that I do with Bottom Line when we go and meet these kids, I am hyping up the boys. When the boys have a comment, I'm hyping them up because you don't usually see that. So I'm like, yes, black man. Yes, young man. Hyping them up to feel comfortable in that space about their choices for college.
Curtis.
Exposure. That's it. Exposure.
Yes.
I am so sorry. We ran out of time. We could talk to both of you all day. Danielle North is the founder of the Detroit chapter of the College Readiness Program, The Bottom Line. Curtis Lewis works to get more black men as teachers in classrooms through his organization, Black Male Educators Alliance. Curtis, Danielle, thank you so much for joining us on the Metro. We'll have you both back very soon.
We'll be back. Thank you.
Hosted by Robin Vincent and Tia Graham. The show is produced by Sam Corey, Kerry Jr. II, and Jack Philbrand. Our senior producer is David Lyons. Our engineer is Nate Bender. Music and creative audio production by Sam Bobian. The Metro is a production of WDET, a listener-supported service of Wayne State University. This is 1019 WDET-FM, Detroit Public Radio, your connection to news, music, and conversation.